Welcome back to the Advanced Software Architecture course. This is part 3 of the domain modeling lecture, and my name is Riccardo Scandariato. In this part, we will cover how to build a domain model. In order to build a domain model, we need to analyze some documents that capture the domain knowledge. For instance, if we're lucky, we already have a textual description of the domain. And for instance, this description might come from interviews that have been done previously with the key stakeholders in the business domain. Sometimes, for business reasons, you might have a vision and scope document for the system that you have to build. Or it might be that there are already documents around about the requirements of existing other products. If you don't have access to any of this documentation, of course, you're out of luck and you have to conduct interviews with the stakeholders in order to gather the necessary domain knowledge before you start building the model. Once you have gathered the necessary documentation, you can analyze it and parse the documents in order to identify the elements of your domain model. For instance, nouns in the documents very often translate to classes and attributes in your domain model, while verbs and active phrases translate to associations. However, you have to be careful because sometimes words may be ambiguous, or a couple of words or more words can be synonym of the same concept in your domain model. Also, as mentioned previously, you have to be careful that sometimes verbs refer to behavior that are rather captured with use cases. So, for instance, you have a verb that is describing more a requirement than an association for your domain model. And also you have to fight the temptation of doing a design in your domain model. We covered the distinction between domain model and software design, and a domain model and requirements in the first part of this lecture. If you don't recall that, this is a good time to make a break and go back to that. Very often when you are considering a noun, for instance, in the documentation, you end up in a dilemma. Should I rather model this as a class or an attribute? So in this slide, we try to give you a couple of guidelines in order to simplify that decision. Typically, you rather and better go for an attribute when that concept relies on another concept for its existence. A typical example, you have an order number only in the context of an existing order. You don't have an order number existing on itself in isolation. This is a typical hint that should drive you to modeling order number as an attribute and not as a class. Also, you don't want to pollute the domain model with too many classes, because then it will not become readable. So for instance, if the concept could be modeled as a simple data type, like for instance, customer age would be just a simple data type like a number, and in this case it's probably a good choice to model that concept as an attribute and not as a class. So in summary, at the end of the 3 parts of this lecture, you should be able to understand the importance and purpose of a domain model and why it is useful or interesting to build one. B, know what goes into a domain model and C, having some guidelines on how to start building a domain model. This is the end of part 3 of the domain modeling lecture. Thank you for watching.